Alright, so in this video we're going to have a translation and a discussion of one of the 2025-2026 AP Latin project passages in poetry, which comes from Ovid's Fasti, book 2 I think, and it is about Arion, a famous Greek musician. So let's go ahead and get started and see what it says. So nevertheless, it begins off by saying, Quod mare, what sea? And no, it of course comes from, if I were to get the principal parts, Noscere, which of course means to know, and here it is perfect, but often it has a present meaning in that perfect sense, and so therefore, who has not known, or just who does not know, as in what sea does not know, and quae telus. Telus telluris is land. What land does not know Arion, the Greek accusative singular that is this musician. We then go on to find out more about him. Ile, that guy, so the first line tells us he's incredibly famous, was holding the correntes aquas, the running waters, with his song. So much like Orpheus, he has the ability, apparently, to control nature with his musical abilities. Saipe, then, we find out the extent of his musical prowess and capabilities, and that repetition that we see there of, obviously, Saipe the anaphora. And as well, please note that the meter that he is using, Ovid, is going to be that of elegiac couplet, in which the first line is going to be the familiar epic dactylic hexameter, and the second line is going to be that of dactylic pentameter, in which the pentameter line is going to have the pattern of where you would have either dactyl or a spondy, then you would have another dactyl or a spondy, then you would merely have a long syllable, and then following that you would have two dactyls, always dactyls, and then another long syllable, making then obviously 1 foot, 2 foot, 3 foot, 4 foot, and then pentameter for the 5th foot that one sees there. But you don't need to know how to obviously scan the line of elegiac couplet. So often, a wolf following a lamb, agnam being a lamb here, res tentus est, has been held back by his voice. Now, obviously, the reason why the wolf is chasing after the lamb, it's a matter of life and death, and so therefore the musical capabilities of Arion is that of more powerful than life and death. And then on the other hand, as it were, often a lamb, now as your nominative subject, fugiens, another present active participle, fleeing the avid, the ravenous, the eager wolf, it has stopped. And so again, the reason why the lamb runs away is a matter of life and death. And so Arion's musical capabilities is able to halt that sort of business then. Inde, thenceforth, or from there, and here now we're obviously going to jump to the new subject, which is Arion the musician himself, seeking home again, and so repetains, another present active participle. He conscendits, he embarks, he climbs aboard the poopim, which is literally the poop deck, a part of the ship, but by a version of metonymy. Remember that metonymy is where you have a literary device in which one thing represents another, but a subcategory of metonymy is that of synecdoche, which a singular part of something represents the whole. Like if somebody gets a brand new car, you roll up and nice wheels. You don't literally mean the wheels represent the car as a whole. And that's what we have here with poop deck representing the whole ship. So he climbs aboard a ship, and in such a way, he was carrying resources, riches. Remember that this is not the word for work, which is opus operis, but rather opus, which can obviously mean resources or riches, if you would like, especially in the plurality. So he was carrying riches, wealth, having been acquired, having been obtained, having been sought by his skill. And so apparently he has earned a little money from his music and probably a musical contest of some sort, and now he's on his way back home. Fortisan, which is the exact same as fortasse. Perhaps, oh unlucky one. This is when the poet is addressing the actual character himself, a version of apostrophe. Remember that apostrophe is the literary device in which you address by vocative case, usually in Latin, the person who is not there. And so here in this apostrophe, he, Ovid, the poet, is talking directly to Arion himself. Perhaps, oh unlucky one, you were fearing the winds, and the waves. And so he's indicating to him, perhaps you were scared to be on this boat because of obviously the troubles that a storm might come on the sea or the sea itself. but ot. The C, the ichor, the evenness, as it were, another word that we find often in poetry for the C. It was to tee us. More safe, a comparative, and in this instance it is a comparative adjective that is obviously linked by the linking verb to our ichor subject, than. Now remember that in the ablative, which to here is a long A, is going to be translated by, with, because of, from, in, on, at, and than, especially when it's hanging around a comparative. So the C was more safe for you than your ship. And so we're going to learn about why his ship is the one that obviously he needs to be worried about instead of rough waters or a storm. Namque, for the governor, the one who drives the ship, we'll just call him the captain, the gubernator. He stood, he did stand, he has stood, taking a position with his sword having been drawn. And so therefore, when Arion, gets on the boat, apparently the captain of the ship, recognizing that fact that he has these riches, is going to turn into a pirate, one who is going to rob you on the high seas. Que, and the remaining crowd, conscia here means conspiring, and the remaining conspiring crowd with their hand having been armed. And so apparently when Arion gets on this ship, they're all going to obviously threaten him and try and rob him, presumably killing him as well. And that is indeed what we assume from the very next line, 9:11. And so it says, Ile, that guy says, trembling with fear, scared with fear, non deprecor, I do not deprecate death. Deprecate means to pray against. And so he says, I'm not asking against death. I'm not praying against death. I accept my fate that you're going to kill me and take my money. Said, but, and here we have, of course, a present subjunctive. We fear a giant liar. And so that way, and by the way, as those of you who don't know, is that when I say we, that's the E of the first conjugation subjunctive, fear, E-A of the second conjugation, a third conjugation, giant, I-A, third I-O, and then liar for first, second, third I-O, and fourth conjugation. And so here we have the E-A of the fear. We fear a giant liar. And when it is not subordinated, and we don't see a coon, we don't see an ut, we don't see any of sorts of words that would subordinate these subjunctives, then we will translate it as a jussive subjunctive, let. And so, but let it be permitted, referre, to bring back, to sing, implied here, a few things, neuter, plural, accusative, and substantize, with my lyre, long A, having been taken up. And so he is looking to obviously give one final song, one final musical kind of performance, as it were, before inevitably he accepts his fate of being killed and all of his money being obviously taken from him. They, meaning presumably the captain and the crew, they give dodari dedidatis the permission, the equivalency that the people have given us in the notes is beneficium. I'm going to give it here as the translation. They give him the permission, they give him the ability, they give him the allowance, as it were. And they laugh, rideo ridere, at the delay. Now remember that this word is the noun, mora morai, morai, which is a delay itself, but it is a cognate. It is related to the devoted verb, moror, morari, and then of course moratus sum, which means to delay as an action. And so they laugh at the delay. In other words, he is in their eyes simply delaying the inevitable that they will kill him, they will take his money. And so that guy, meaning obviously Arion again, he takes up capio capere, the corona. This obviously is the crown that one must wear when you play your lyre, when you sing your music, as it were. Think of it in terms of, as I give the analogy of a marching band. Why do they wear the goofy hat? That's what you do when you're obviously performing in a marching band. Why do you have the little feather in that goofy hat? That's what you do when you're obviously performing in a marching band. It's just the matter of how you appear and how you prepare when you perform your music, as it were. And so it's the crown. Now, not a specific crown per se, but the kind of crown. Now, how do I know that it is the type of crown, the kind of crown? Because immediately when we have the quae, which is a relative, introducing a relative clause, we have a subjunctive, which obviously is from post sum posse, but it is the subjunctive present of the verb sumesse, sim, sis, sit, semicitizen. And so this is going to be then a relative clause of characteristic, telling us that it is not the specific crown, which would require a indicative, which would be of course est, but instead it's the kind of crown, or crown I should say, that which might be able, would be able, could be able to be suitable, to adorn, to decorate your hair, O Phoebus. And remember, this is Phoebus Apollo, another one of his epithets, another one of his names, a sobriquet, if you would like, for Apollo, as it were. And so therefore, he takes on the exact kind of crown that the ultimate of all musicians, Apollo himself, would obviously don. And he had put on, in due erat, a cloak, a palla, a robe, if you would so wish, in this way. Having been dyed, having been soaked, having been colored, if you would like, with Tyrian murex, and it's dyed twice, as it were. Now, Tyrian murex is obviously recalling one of the great cities of Phoenicia, the city where Dido is actually from, which is that of Tyre, and they were famous for the murex, which is actually a snail-like sea creature, a marine animal, from which you would then extract purple dye. But it would take hundreds of thousands of these things in order to get the purple dye. And because it was so difficult to extract and needed so much quantity of these animals just to get a little bit of dye, then that purple dye is going to be incredibly valuable, incredibly expensive, and that's why royalty is going to become associated with that of purple, because it is such a rare, rare color that one has. And so this tells you that Arion not only is going to be, of course, filled with pockets of money from the winnings that he has made from his musical contests, but they recognize him as being rich because of what obviously he is wearing. And nevertheless, and so then the corda, this is the string of the lyre, having been struck, having been plucked with the thumb, it gave back, redere, and it's perfect tense here, its own sounds. And so he makes the sound, and here we have weluti, which remember that when you have oot or welut or ooty or weluti, they will often introduce, kind of like Qualis will, a simile. And so we translate it like or just as, any of those be perfectly fine. And so here the simile is being made of what he is doing, and obviously his lyre and the string of the lyre, just like a swan. Having been pierced, triectus, a perfect passive participle, dura henna, with a harsh arrow, just like that swan sings. And here, having been pierced, and what we have with Canintia tempora is the ablative, or not ablative, I'm so sorry, the accusative that is the Greek accusative of respect, or as I often like to say, the accusative of the body part, which I got from one of my professors in college, Dr. Diggs, because inevitably, 9 times out of 10, when you have this accusative of respect, it is going to be most likely a body part, and that is exactly what we have here. Canintia is the word for white, so you just think of it as being alba, if you so wish, and your tempora is your brow, or I like to translate it as the temples, and so therefore you translate it with respect to. And so therefore, just like a swan, having been pierced with respect to its white brow or its white temples with a harsh arrow, just like that swan sings with sad songs or with sad lyrics, is what Numeris is going to be. And so what we are describing here is an actual swan song. This idea that the ancients had, that indeed a swan, silent for most of its life, right before its death, is going to obviously sing the most sad and beautiful of all songs. And that's why we have in our language, in English, the term swan song. Somebody's swan song is the last thing that they do. Like, for example, if a professional athlete decides, this is going to be my last year, and after a long and storied career, his last season, her last season, is going to be their swan song. Last thing that they do before they retire, as it were. So this is 2026. I would not be surprised if next year the NBA season for LeBron James, if he chooses to play another year, would be his quote-unquote swan song. Nevertheless, we continue on. So of course Arion is giving his own version of a swan song, and then Protinus. And man, do I hate adverbs that end with us, but inevitably they're out there in Latin, because when you see that us, you think it is a, of course, nominative, either noun or adjective, but it's not. It is the word that means immediately, the equivalency of statim. Having been ornated, having been dressed, having been fully clothed is what ornatus mean. He jumps down into the middle waves. And the cerulean poop deck, and again, by synecdoche, the poop deck is going to be the ship as a whole, and cerulean means, of course, sky blue. It is splashed, it is splattered with the water having been struck. And so when he jumps down, does his little cannonball, presumably, into the water with all of his clothes on, then the water splashes all onto the poop deck and the ship itself. And so the ship, the cerulean ship, is splashed with the water having been struck. And from there, fide maius, greater, which of course maius is the comparative of magnum, and so maius, greater than faith. In other words, this phrase means you wouldn't be able to believe it. This is bigger than believable, as it were. And so greater than faith, it's kind of like, for example, if you were to have the, of course, famous supine, mirabile visu, amazing to see. That's kind of the equivalency of what we have here. And so from there, greater than faith, in other words, you won't believe it, they recall, they say, they recount, memoro, memorare, the people who were obviously witness to this amazing thing, they recount that. And what we then have is an accusative singular delphina, which of course is a Greek form. They recount that a dolphin did place, has placed itself, and so your object of the posuisse. And remember that when we indeed are thinking about in terms of the relationship of the action of the infinitive in the indirect statement versus the action of the mental action, which is memorant, memorant is present tense, and so it starts right here, and a perfect infinitive is merely going to indicate an action that needs to be before the introductory action, and so therefore we just merely make it something in the past. And so therefore a dolphin, they say, placed, did place, has placed itself under its curved back for the novo oneri, for the new load. And so essentially what is being described is the dolphin comes along and places its curved back underneath the guy. He's the new load. Arion is that burden, and he's now going to be riding a dolphin. And so that guy sitting, presumably on the dolphin, and holding the lyre, the kithara, he sings the price of carrying. Where Hindi, with that nd, is either a gerund or gerundive. And remember that to be a gerundive, it's going to have to be an adjective and modify something. And so there is nothing, obviously, that Hindi is modifying. And so it's a gerund, the act itself of carrying. And that is indeed his kind of a ticket for the dolphin, or his toll, if you would like, the price that the dolphin is going to extract from him. So he sings his price of carrying it. And he soothes, mokeo mokere, the sea-like waters, ikoreos, meaning related to the sea, carmine, with his song. And so therefore, obviously, this is that story of Arion, who gets on the boat, is threatened, obviously, by the pirates. We've already learned that he is incredibly capable as a musician, even having the power over nature and life and death urges. And in order to obviously try and escape the predicament which he is in, he asks to sing one more song, his quote-unquote swan song, upon which then he immediately jumps in the water and is saved, as it tells to us, by that dolphin, who of course placed itself underneath its curved back for that new load, which was Arion, and thus he is able to escape. So, good luck, keep studying, and hope you enjoy these project passages. I certainly have.